Hey y'all, and welcome back to Inclusive Design 24, 2024, brought to you in partnership with our Platinum supporters, Barrier Break and Intopia, as well as our Gold supporters, InfoAxia and Tetralogical. You can follow us on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Mastodon, and if you have questions for our presenter, post them using the hashtag ID24 hashtag. Um, or you can use the YouTube chat live as the session is streaming. We'll be monitoring that as well. And we'll be gathering questions either for Q&A at the end of the session or for during the session, as this is a live audience feedback session. A reminder that ID24 is a respectful community, and you can find our code of conduct on the Inclusive Design 24 website, which is inclusivedesign24.org. And now I'm really excited to be joined by my guest host, Ted Drake. Ted, over to you.
Thank you so much. We just finished with a session that's talking about incorporating a diverse group of people in your studies, your inclusive design studies for a client. And now we're going to be switching over, and Anh Duong will be talking about how to consider non-native English speakers in UX. And don't limit it to just non-native English speakers. It's non-native speakers of any language. And that probably also would include sign language. With that, over to you, Anne.
Cool. Kia ora, hello, and xin chào, wherever you are in the rest of the globe. My name is Anh, and today, yes, I will be talk about how can we consider non-native English speakers in user experience design. Cool. So for today, table of content. First of all, I'm gonna talk about myself because I love talking about myself, and second of all, we're gonna go through the content on how as non-native English speaker user are your users, the common UX design that I find that are not helpful for ESL user, which is also the acronym for English as a second language users, and then provide you guys some tips to improve UX for ESL users. And while I'm going through my talks, I will have some questions, and it will be really cool if you guys can participating in putting in the chat your answer and your thought. And my lovely host over here will help me monitoring the chat and going through some of your comments and helping me participating and making it a more interactive talk rather than just me talking my way through all the time. Cool. Now let's get started. Let's just get to know each other for a little bit. So my name is Anh, and currently I'm reside in New Zealand. Hence, I said kia ora all the time. I was born and raised in Vietnam, and I'm fully fluent in Vietnamese. I grew up learning English through schools a little bit, but mainly a lot of it was American TV show, hence the accent, even though I live in New Zealand, cartoons and American YouTube channels. So a lot of it is internet, English language. I also used to teach English as a second language to adults, and I worked as an interpreter when I was living back in Vietnam. So after that experience, I kind of get an understanding of how Vietnamese learn and understand English. And also, after I moved here, I work with, more colleagues and friends and knowing more people. And I kind of understand their perspective on how they look at English and learning English as someone who is not a native speaker. So, whenever I bring up the topics of non-native English speakers to wherever I worked at, a lot of the time people would ask me like, are they really our user? Like English is quite like a common language. I guess like everyone's kind of knowing it, and maybe a lot of our apps and products are built inside the country and is using for local. So maybe, it's not really like a large population that we should cater to. But actually, if you're looking at the stats here, worldwide, the English language is now spoken by around 1.35 billion people, and non-native English speakers are making up for 75% of them. In New Zealand, for my context, 91% of overseas born population were able to speak English, with 59% of them were able to speak non-New Zealand official language. So like half of them, over half of them, speaking another language in addition to English. So again, like, you know how our brains works kind of differently when we speak different language, including myself, and that's where I want to come from. By July 2024, the number of immigrants peaked as almost 600,000 immigrants in New Zealand, and the top two are from India and Philippines. So again, 600,000 immigrants in New Zealand, and we're quite a small country, and there are around 5 million of us. So again, you do the math, there's a huge population out there of people who are non-native English speakers. So what are some common UX design that might not be that helpful for this large group of population? Let's looking at forms, because we all love forms. We love filling in them. We can spend all day on forms. Yay, yippee. No, we don't. We don't love forms. So look at this form. This is from a New Zealand airline sign-up detail form. And on here is asking you to fill in personal details. This including the title, first name, middle name, family name, preferred name, and date of birth. Just want to give you guys like a quick question. Like, how would you normally filling in this form? Just, think in your head a little bit. How would you go through it? And this is something that, we usually fill in our day-to-day life when we sign up for apps, products, everything, right? But in this scenario, I almost missed my flight back home because of this form. In this form, the field middle name is optional, even though it is required for international flight. And optional to me means that if this being left blank, it doesn't affect my form submission. It doesn't affect the result of my form submission. So I can submit this form without a middle name and it should be fine. But it's not. I feel like in this case, what they were thinking was that middle name optional, as in some people might not have middle name and you don't have to fill it in. But this kind of instruction is not that helpful. The name field also are displayed in a Western-centric composition where you have first name, middle name, and then family name. When I study English, the word first name and last name describe the order of names based on the Western standard, but that's not the same case for me, and I'm from Vietnam. However, people cultural background determines how their name is formed. For example, for me, or also for people who are Chinese, our names are displayed with family name first and given name last. So every time I have to encounter interaction with government or I have to fill in forms, signing up for anything, I have to have this spiel to explain what my name is. And usually name is something that we just use it day to day and we really don't think about it. But in those interactions, I always have to explain. So here is all of my different kind of paperwork and my names are displayed all differently because of these reasons. My first name is placed last, my last name is placed first, yada, yada, yada. So a lot of that happened. Latin Americans also might have two or more last name and one or more from each parent. So sometimes people would have like hyphens in their names, and if in your forms you're not allowed special characters, that can be huge problems for them. For me, my Vietnamese name, first name, is usually 2 words instead of 1. So how do I write that in my form? That's always like something that I have to think about. How do I want people to call me or referring me, and how do I make it not confusing for them? Because I know my name, but they don't. Some Native American people also have numbers in their name. So again, special characters or numbers that are being limited in form fields can create a problem for them too. And some people have only 1 or 2 character as their first name. We've all stumbled upon this example of this form where someone whose last name is Yu, spelled Y-U, and the form popped out an arrow saying that hey, like you need 3 or more characters in your last name. And this was not great, because who are you to say that I don't have a correct name? That's how I feel a lot of the time. So again, looking at like a real example. So on the left is a Vietnamese passport, which what I have right now, and it displays my full name. And on the right is a New Zealand passport, which breaks down names into surname and given names. Another thing is that given names is the term that I just learned when I went to New Zealand. So again, even in English-speaking country, there are different ways of people referring to names. To adapt to the Western name standard, my New Zealand driver license only has surname and no first name, and same as my friend. So when my friend got pulled over by the cops, he was getting into troubles because the police thought that his driver license was fake because there's only surname. So again, a lot of these like interaction is very inconvenient for us. We have to make a lot of explanation, a lot of editing regarding our names. So what can we do about it? Right? So on the left is the example that I've shown before. On the right is the Vietnamese airline sign-off details. So here for this form, Vietnam Airline definitely has think about their user who are Vietnamese and who have, a little bit of like a special names. After you fill in title, your family name, your given name, you have the option to select your name ordering, whether it's family first, given names second, or the other way around. You can also enter your full name that you want to be displayed on your membership card. You can also display your full name in local language if you wanted to. So like allowing them to personalize the experience, but also making sure that the user feel that they fill in something and making sure it's accurate. When we're filling in forms, user want to have this sense of like safety and accuracy. They want to make sure that they fill in the right thing and doing the right thing. Another way we can do is just asking for full name instead. If it's not necessary for you to collecting the first name and last name in 2 different form fields, then maybe just asking for a full name. And then if you want a personalized experience, for example, I know in some email marketing system, people would prefer to using the user first name to make it the experience or the email more personalized, making them feel more closer to the brand. So you can adding another extra field called preferred name or something like what should we call you. Another way that can be very helpful is instructions. I know that name is something that's very difficult, and I've worked with multiple systems and I've talked with developers, and somehow names is something that is really hard. So if you cannot change things in the back end on the developer end, then what can we do on the designer end? What we can do is provide more instruction. And I know that there will be argument about user don't read instruction, but you should still provide instruction for your users. Here on an Australia visa application, it provides instruction for different names formats. For example, how do you fill in an Indian names, Malay or Muslim name, Chinese name, Western name, other Asian names. So they make sure that you filling in the form correctly and accurately. It's also giving you instruction about what family name is, or also in very detail, like something that people who speak English as a native language wouldn't really think about. Like you would just think about, oh, family name is family name, but it's actually a word where not a lot of people know. Some places it's being known as last name or surname. So here in this form is indicating that, and it's also describing detail that is the name that's shared with the rest of the family, whereas given names are the names that are unique to an individual. So really good detail and description. Okay, moving on to the next form, address. What do you understand by address line 2? I've been ordering stuff, and and I've been moving places and everything, and I have to fill this all the time. So how can I fill in address line 2? And again, just like name, address is something that seems to be super straightforward and something that you do every day and you don't really have to think about it. But when you're living in another country, and when you speak another language, is actually more different than we thought. And that's popping so many questions in my head. And I was like, wait, am I dumb? Like, I literally thought I was dumb for like thinking about this and wondering what is address line 2, because address should be something that's so easy and simple. But I Google it, just like a lot of us who, what we do when we have question in our head, right? We're Googling it. And I saw a bunch of other questions too. So other people are asking the same question. How do I fill in address line 1 and line 2? What information belongs on address line 2? So, and why is address line 2 is optional? Another thing on this form is that the word state. Where I live in New Zealand, we don't use the word state. So is it the same as region or suburb? Like, what are they actually asking for? And the problem is that address line 2 is just a way to name a spillover field. It is not a helpful label, and I think it was something that's invented when we sending parcel in person and we just filling in the address box in person on the parcel using our pen. And now when we digitalize it, we just don't know what to call it, so we just call it address line 2. That's my assumption. And it is something that's just widely used with the assumption that everyone has a shared understanding of what is being asked for. But actually, geographical hierarchy is different for different countries. New Zealand geographical hierarchy doesn't include state. So as where I come from in Vietnam, we also have district in Vietnam, and I didn't see it there in the address form. So what should I do? So again, another good example that I found about this is that for street address, you can just putting a more labeled instruction on how you would like the user to fill in it. For example, for address line 1, you can say street and number, PO box, etc. And for address line 2, you ask them to fill in their apartment number, the suite, the unit, the building, the floor. Also here, what I like in this form is that how they, in the label, they provide state / province / region. So it's telling me that these are the same thing, and that it's making me less confused. So it's provide more detailed instruction for which information is expected for the street address field. And all of these related to WCAG or WCAG. And if you are not aware or if you're not familiar, what is WCAG? It stands for Web Content Accessibility Guideline. And I assume that a lot of you guys who are joining Inclusive Design 24 have heard about WCAG before. So it's basically accessibility guideline and standard that we should follow in order to make the web more accessible and more inclusive. So if you want to get a little bit more geeky and into detail on what success criteria it relates to, then it's related to 3.3.2 labeled instruction, whereas it's asking if labeled instruction is provided when content require user input. It means if you have form field, you need to provide a labeled instruction to tell user that they need to input their content. And also related to 2.4.6, which is headings and labels. And the headings and the label should describe the topic or the purpose. For example, if you have a form field, you would tell the user how to use it and how to provide correct information in it. Now, let's moving on to something that's also very important in UX, which is UX writings. Synonyms and acronyms. Okay, so this is an example from a test that I've done before in an accessibility course. And in this test, there's this question. It's asked, which of these standards is absolutely essential for accessibility? There's three options: A, or A and double A, or A and double A and triple A. So I think the answer was A, but how do you understand this question? Have a think about it. So the problem that I found, and not because I was bitter that I got it wrong, but I was wondering why did I got it wrong. And I've been practicing accessibility for a while up until this point before I taken this test. And I figure it was the use of the word absolute would describe like something at the maximum level, and essential would describe something I understand as a minimum level in the same sentence. And it's very confusing for me, and I couldn't grasp that. I think in this question, just using the word essential is good enough. And I also search up for the word essential, and it's actually mean absolutely necessary. So if you replace that into the question, it would have means which of these standards is absolutely necessary for accessibility. So the way I understand this question was that what is like the bare minimum that you can do? And the bare minimum is level A. So that's why I picked A. But I reckoned what they want to tell us is that you should aiming for the highest level. Cultural and mindset difference is the problems in this question, because for forms or questionnaire or tests, the UX copy must be functional and as universal as possible. A literal and plain style would always over flourishings and all of these big words in UX writing. So please consider plain language over fancy words or terms, or just too much adjective or something like that. For this form, I would like everyone to have take a close look at it. So here is a part of a form. It is asking about overseas travel in the last 5 years. The first question is, have you stayed in any country for a period of 14 days or more at any one time over the periods of 5 years? There's two answers, yes or no. The second section asking countries visited within the past 5 years, and asking you to provide lists of countries and the total time stayed in each of those countries. There's a table at the bottom asking you to fill in the name of the country, duration of stay, open bracket, month, close bracket, duration of stays in days, and adding more. So putting in the chat, which word do you think can be confusing for ESL user on this screen? And hopefully Eric and Ted can help me monitoring the chat and just read out some of the participant thoughts and what do they think about it.
Yeah, nothing coming in yet, but would you be okay if I took a guess?
Yes.
Okay. I think maybe s stuff like period. So like a period of 14 days.
Yep.
So it's like that has a double meaning. Um, I'm just gonna pause and look at the chat again just to make sure I'm not hogging the spotlight here.
Yeah, and I would add that that first label is a run-on sentence. So it's kind of hard to keep track of what it's talking about.
Mm.
And
Can you please like further explaining what do you mean by like double meaning in the word period? Or
oh, sure. So like I, as a native English speaker, know that a period can be a grammar punctuation, whereas
yep.
period can also mean like a portion of time. Oh, and Sarah Milton in the chat had a really good point of repeating five and then parentheses
Mm.
five. Um, Julia Cotton
Oh.
says it seems very repetitive, only the last part is needed. And then
Mm.
Stephanie Edwards has quoted at any one time.
Mm. Yes. So already we can all point it out that there are so many different words that can be confusing and that there are words that have double meanings or we can interpret it one way or the other. The first thing that came into mind when I'm going through this form and that makes me confusing is actually the use of the word stay and visit.
Hmm.
Like more of the term stay seems to be very ambiguous for me, right? Like, what do you mean by stay and visit? And they use these terms interchangeably in this form. So, as non-native English speakers, I always like to use this site to looking up synonyms and antonyms, um, and I always looking up to see, okay, does visit actually mean stay or is it the other way around? So after I search it up, I find that visit means stay, but stay doesn't mean visit. So this is also not helpful. Again, the use of the word visit and stay interchangeably is not helpful for me because it's not consistent terminology. And the way that me as a non-native English speaker, I tend to reference similar or like the same words to make sure that I understand things correctly. So if at the beginning you're saying something and then later on you're using a word that's similar to that word but not really, then it would automatically makes my brain really confused because I was like, are you still talking about the same thing? And for this example, I will go back to the form. Here, just there's so many ways you can interpret the forms. For example, if I lay over in a country during my flight, does that consider a visit or a stay? Um, and then they also use the word past 5 years and then last 5 years. Is that the same thing? um Also, what if I stay for only 5 hours and here they only allow me to put in a number in months and days? How do I fill in that? Do I need to fill in when I lay over in a country for 3 days or 3 hours? Does it matter for them? What is the purpose of collecting this information, and how accurate do they want me to be? Um, and what if I'm based in two different countries? For example, for myself, I'm flying back to Vietnam quite often. How do I declare that? And, just all of that question is just like bundling up and filling in these form, which is like there's only like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 field. It's already taking me like half an hour just to think about what I should fill in here. Moving on to another part of UX writing that I find very confusing when I first learning English is tenses and word reference. So here is again a question from a test for an accessibility course, and it's asking, how might you explain the problem of poor accessibility caused by your third-party content to your team, since the cost of replacing or rewriting it may cause debate? What is being asked in this question, and what do you think is the expected answer? I'll let that just simmer with you for a minute.
While we wait for replies to come in, this reminds
Yeah.
me of the sentence diagramming exercises we used to do in
Mhm.
school, except that this diagram is like picture a tangled knot of rope.
if there's nothing in the chat, I would assume that, you know, it would take a little while for everyone to kind of like process this question and just like wondering how they should answer it. Because for me, when I first read this, I also don't know how to start writing my answer because I don't understand what they're asking for. Is a really long question and it's just one sentence. I
Sarah,
think it's
I'm
yeah.
so sorry. Sarah Milton and Stephanie Edwards have chimed in with this is awful and ironic, and then wow, what a question, eek. So I just want to validate the feelings you had when you read this question.
Yeah. So I think the fact that it's like trying to, I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to make a very complex question with a lot of context to be concise, and I think that's what they're trying to do. But in doing that, they create this really compound sentence, and it made the question sound like it's already been answered in my perspective when I read it. Because if I look at this question, I saw commas mean there's two parts. So the first part, they're asking the question, how might you explain the problem of poor accessibility? Okay. And then the second part, they say, since the cost of replacing. And I'm like, wait, so is the second part beginning with the word since means you already answered the first part, right? Usually that's how I study English. If I say since something something, it mean because of something something. You already answering it. So what are you asking for? So this question is too difficult to answer. I have to reread it again like 5 or 6 or 10 times, and I still don't know how to answer it. But after a wee while thinking about it, and I think I get what they mean now. So how could we rephrase this question? Just for context, I'm not a content writer. Again, also not a native English speaker. So this is just how I understand the question. And there might be some, content writer or UX writer in the chat or who's watching this can provide some way better examples and solution for this. But here is just my take on it. So I would first providing a context for this question, which is a scenario that your company is having a third party vendor to develop your software. And the cost of replacing or rewriting the current software might cause debate. So, setting up the scenario, explaining what's happening. And then I ask the question, as an accessibility advocate, how might you explain and give suggestion to your team about the risk of poor accessibility caused by using a software from a third party vendor? So, again, I'm not trying to scrunching a bunch of information in one sentence, and I'm just providing people more context so they can understand that, okay, what is being asked for and how you can answer it. Again, this is just my take, not a UX writer, but I would love to see what you guys have in the comment and in the chat. Okay. This form over here asking for this form here is where I apply for an endorsement. And they're asking me for my license status. So I'm read out the form so that everyone can get it. So the section title is license status, and there's a drop down where it's asked, please select the option that applies. I'm currently applying for a license. And then when you expanded that drop down, you have two options. I have a current license, or I am currently applying for a license. And then there's an instruction at the bottom say you must apply or been granted a New Zealand license before you can apply for any endorsement. Again, just let you guys simmering a little bit on this forms, have a close read on it, and trying to wrap your head around the user, like empathize with the user. How can they understand it? How would they understand it? And how would you answering this question? How do you understand it?
While we wait for the delay, I want you to know that I audibly groaned when I saw this. And as you explained it, and I must confess, one other thing as an ignorant American, I'm not exactly sure what an endorsement is in this context.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I also don't really know what an endorsement means actually in this context too. Um, and this is like a very like important like forms from like a government agency.
Yeah. Julia Cotton has asked or has stated, where is the option I don't have, license?
Mm, yeah. Yes. So again, there's so much problems with this forms or this part of the form. Um, I just want to point out the first thing, which is the use of tenses in this form. So here, you say the instruction at the bottom of the form using the present perfect tense, and then in the options, they're using a present simple tense and present continuous tense. This just bringing back all the traumas that I had when I studied English. I just want to say that because Vietnamese doesn't have tense. It's very simple in our language. We have past, present, future, and that's it. Nothing in between. Like we don't have to describe an action that has just finished recently and this have to be different than something that's happened like way, way back in the day, or we don't have a tense for something that explaining what you're doing right now. It's just simple in Vietnamese for me. Like there's no tenses. But here when I study English, there's like 10 different tenses and it's like using different scenario. Not to mention when I come to New Zealand, the way they're using tenses is also different. So I got all confusing. And this is not helpful. Because here the use of present continuous saying I am currently applying for a license means the action is not completed yet. And like as someone putting in the comment, does it mean I does not have a license? Why don't you just say that? Like what's the difference between I'm applying and I have a current one? Like what does it mean and how is it affecting my form submission? The tenses in the drop down option and the tense in the instruction text also doesn't match. It's telling me that I must have applied or been granted a license, but here there's an option that I'm currently applying for one. So why should I even selecting this option anyway? You know what I mean? Like it's just all really confusing. And I think I've talked to a friend of mine who is a developer, and she was saying, if there's only two options, why using a drop down? That's another UI question that I have for this form. Like, there's just so many things that just make me so confusing, and again, not helpful for me to filling out and finishing this. So the problem is that a person who speaks English as a second language doesn't have a natural tie with words the way that native speakers do. So this is similar to the deaf community too, as some consider themselves to be a part of more like a unique culture and linguistic minority who use sign language as their primary language, not English. Sign language is different than English as a language. And not every language has tenses, so simple tense is the easiest to understand. Compound sentence also are trickier and require more time for me to understand. I've had people telling me that, for long question, they'll break down the question and they Google like each part of it just to understand what it means. And just referencing and repeating the same word would help reduce cognitive load. Using synonyms or something like this or that can create a lot of confusion in forms. So let's go through what you can do to improve. Use plain English and keep your English simple. You can use readability testing tools and also ask for user feedbacks. Just plain English is really helpful and it's more accessible to a wide range of people who might have cognitive disability, who are ESL user, who might be digitally excluded, who are elderly, deaf or hard of hearing, neurodivergent. Also in the slide, I included an easy read guideline links that were developed by a group in New Zealand to support people with learning or intellectual disability to better understand written information. You can have a look at that. Also something like adding visual cues and extra support like tooltips, using colors and icon to pair with text, and especially providing screenshot as an instruction can be very helpful alongside with just using text on itself. But a lot of people would argue that if you were designed correctly, you wouldn't need the tooltips, which is true for native English speaker, again. But for ESL user, like just something that's small, unobtrusive explanation next to key action or information can provide that continued layer of help. It's like a hand-holding experience that help them provide more clarity and comfort even without a full understanding of the language. Just providing that comfort, making people feel safe when they're filling in the form and knowing that they're filling something accurately. And once the user become more familiar with your product, then they'll naturally just filter out the information that they have already known. Tooltips also must be keyboard accessible. Just a note over there. And it's also best to have them triggered by user on click and the enter key rather than on hover. So if you're making it only display on hover, it will be inaccessible for people who might have motor disability or is a keyboard only user. If it's a part of the form, then using arrow described by to connect the help text to the form field. So here there's two examples. One where on the left, they're providing instruction on how to provide your New Zealand passport photos. And it's just like listing out all of these specs. And it's also say photo specs, which to begin, I don't understand what that means. But on the right here, they have example of what is a good portrait image, what should you do, and they're using both text and images as instruction, adding in some color, green for acceptable, and red for incorrect with some more icon with the check mark and the cross. So it's also good for people who might be colorblind. User testing and feedback is also something very important, including ESL user in your UX research, just like testing with user with accessibility needs. Ask someone you know, like your colleagues. I know user research can be really expensive, but tap the dude on the side sitting right next to you, asking him, hey, can you just, have a read at this content and just tell me if it's read well for you? Is there anything that might confuse you? So something like that can be really helpful, and it's going to be like such a quick guerrilla testing for you to see if your content reads well with someone who is not a native English speaker. They're best positioned not to assume that there's always a shared understanding. Words could have more than one meaning, and they might require clarification. And I've just tell you how cultural and geographical context can be such an important part about language, and it can affect how we understand the language too. I've talked a lot here, but let's just narrowing down to some key points that you can bring home. Key takeaway here. Again, culture shapes how people learn languages, so it's important to get user feedback rather than assume shared understanding. Plain English, go plain English all the time. Just, make content more accessible and relatable to a broader audience. Keep your language simple. You don't have to use fancy or big words. As long as the user can use it, they're happy. And there's no universal design solution for non-native speakers. Culture will influence the mental models. So context is crucial. Provide instruction, hand-holding experience can really help user who need that extra little help or might have, problem with computer literacy. Generative UX research and testing with diverse user can help create fairer design. Make sure you include them, we're inclusive design 24, right? Let's just include different group, a population of users in your research, consider them, asking them what might be confusing them. And just accessibilities, good UX writing, just benefit everyone. And it supports various experience and abilities. And as I said before, even though this talk is for non-native English speaker, it can also benefiting user who might have who's deaf, have hard of hearings, who might have intellectual disability, cognitive overload. Everyone can benefiting from this. And I'll leave some time for some questions in the chat. But in the meantime, Thank you so much. Ngam Hi Nui. Cảm ơn. And here's all my handles. Just, connect with me, asking question. I always love to connect and learn from new people. And thank you so much for spending your time listening to my talk. I really appreciate it. And if you have any questions or have any thoughts, feel free to put in the comments and would love to read what you guys think about today's talk. And that's me.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for a lovely talk. We did have one question come in, and let me dig it up right here. Julia Cotton asked on YouTube, um, and this is speaking to an earlier slide, but I think is also worth kind of maybe discussing, is she was
Yeah.
asking if it would be helpful as a pattern to ask for the country first and then format based off of that.
Mm, I think it will be a discussion also with your developer because I feel like it really depends on what you're building your UI on. Um, if you can customize it based on the countries, like I think that's super awesome. But again, I'm just being aware that it can be a barrier or there can be limitation regarding tech in order to get that happen. So again, like just be more considerate of where your user might be locating or um, yeah, just provide more instruction on how they can provide address accurately or provide example. Actually, that would be good if you
Mhm.
cannot using this whole fancy like drop down select countries and then it's popping out a whole form and all of that. Examples is something that's I feel like easy to implement, but like it's always overlooked. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a really smart answer. This is not a right now thing, but if you are on social networks, there was a request from Sarah Milton to post the link for easy read guidelines again. I believe they stated that the URL isn't working,
Oh.
but
Oh.
that's something we don't have to address right now. We can definitely follow
Yes.
up on social media with. Drake, I'd like to turn it over to you with some of the time we have for any questions on your end of things.
Well, I have had so many questions. I can't tell you how many I've been copying and pasting, and I've actually shared your presentation to our content design team. It's really been a powerful presentation with so many good tips. And I think that some of the things as a native English speaker, we just kind of assume because we've learned those tricks of how to kind of twist our mind around certain sentence structures, but taking it from a new perspective is a great way of doing it. We are at the time of the hour, so we do need to prepare for our next presentation. I will say, if you want to learn more about language, I was watching your YouTube channel, and it's quite fun. So, Un does have a great YouTube channel where she's vlogging her experiences in New Zealand from a Vietnamese perspective.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That's kind of a plug. I didn't expect that, but thank you.
Amazing. All right.
Cool.
Well,
Thank you so much, everyone.
yeah, thank you for taking the time. So I'm gonna do my little spiel here to see us all out. If you like this session, you do that classic hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube, and that will keep you in the loop for future events, including next year's sessions as well as the sessions that will follow for the rest of ID 2024. Um, Inclusive Design 2024 is brought to you with thanks from our supporters, including Barrier Break, Intopia, Infoaxia, Tetralogical, Intuit, Adrian Roselli LLC, Assistive Labs, the Law Office of Laney Feingold, Skyscanner, and Vispero. And we will be back at the top of the hour with our next session. So see you all then.
Cheers.
Thank you,
See ya.
everybody.
Thank you.